You're listening to The Heart of Now, radically honest conversations about living free from suffering, hosted by Elizabeth Rayner and Monica Rose. Welcome to all the good people who are tuning in today to the Heart of Now podcast. I'm Monica Rose, co-hosting with the fabulous Elizabeth Rayner. Say hi to everybody, Elizabeth.
Hi, everyone. I'm so glad to be here.
Wonderful. We're so excited today to be talking with someone who is very dear to my heart, Lama Palden Drolma. She's the founder and senior Lama of Sukha City Foundation, a Tibetan Buddhist center in the Shangpa and Kagyu lineages. With gratitude to her gurus, Lama Palden transmits, trains, and mentors students and clients, passing on the teachings and practices that enable one to reach complete awakening. She has a lifelong interest in comparative mysticism and interspirituality. She also worked for years as a licensed psychotherapist, and in addition to teaching, now does spiritual counseling at the intersection of spirituality and psychology. If you haven't checked out her book, I highly recommend it. It's called Love on Every Breath and focuses on the practices of Tonglen. You can learn more about her and her book at lamapalden.org. Welcome, Lama Palden. I'm just so thrilled to be with you today, as is Elizabeth. We'd like to really spend some time with you and ask you some questions that have been on our mind.
Sounds good. Thank you for inviting me. Lovely to be with you.
Oh, wonderful. We're just so excited. So the first question that we wanted to ask you about is really just a little bit about your journey and your path, which is really what's been the most catalytic moment to your self-discovery?
Oh, I think I have to say two things. First, meeting my guru. And I came to a point in my 20s when I had been doing spiritual practice and, meditating every day and doing a lot of yoga. And I just realized that I needed a teacher, a personal teacher, somebody that was personal to me and I didn't really wasn't in any specific tradition. So I started praying, and actually I was praying to Mary, although I'd been doing, Buddhist practice and Sufi practice and various things, but I was praying to Mary to meet my teacher. And a few months later, somebody dragged me off to meet Kala Rinpoche, an old Tibetan Lama. So that was the first really profound change in my life, was meeting him and then going to the Himalayas to study and practice with him and under his guidance, and eventually going into a 3-year retreat under his guidance in British Columbia. So those were really life-changing events. And then following retreat which was in the early 80s, the long retreat. Following that in the 90s, realizing non-self and all the repercussions of realizing emptiness, of coming into more and more realization of the true nature of self and reality. That was the really second huge change for me and in my spirituality and in my life in general.
Fascinating. I mean, I'm so curious if you could help our viewers and listeners understand a little bit like what your definition of emptiness is, because many people think about it in different ways. I'm curious kind of what your point of view of what you believe emptiness to be.
Well, it really means that things don't inherently exist in the way we think they do. And they don't not exist, but they don't exist. And they don't, do both or neither. So that true nature is inherent in everything, and that true nature is what is changeless, and all the phenomena that we experience is changing always. And that phenomena, whether it's of self or other or objects or whatever, is just not really truly existent in the way we think it is. It's illusory. And another way of saying emptiness is openness, the complete openness of everything. Of course, in Sanskrit, it's called shunyata. And because of the connotations of the term emptiness, it can have sort of a negative feel for Westerners, learning that term in English, at least. Suzuki Roshi, the great Zen master, there was a quote that he said that resting in emptiness was like nursing from your mother's breast.
Oh, I just love that. That's so great.
I love that too.
There is one thing I is coming to me that I just am curious about is, when you found your teacher, did you just know that Kalu Rinpoche was the teacher you were looking for? Was it something that you just inherently knew, or did it unfold over time?
For me, which is a little unusual, I knew within 5 minutes, and I was
Mm.
not a Buddhist. I was not a Tibetan Buddhist or anything. As I said, I'd been doing some Buddhist practice, but I just knew that whatever he was, it didn't matter, whatever tradition he was, because I was open to all traditions, but that he in particular was my teacher. It was just an immediate kind of recognition.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah,
that's never wavered in the,
Mm.
45, 50 years since that time.
That's so powerful. I mean, I think I hear so often people are like, how do you know that it's the right tradition or the right teacher? So it's just really wonderful to hear that for you it's just so instinctual and just really following that and knowing that on a cellular level, it sounds like.
Yeah, and just I think it's different with everybody how that happens, but it's something that is a heart knowing,
Mm,
that's not a belief or an idea, but that, like you said, is instinctual in your cells, or, I just think of it as a deep heart knowing that
mm.
comes when it comes, and I had 8 important teachers, but then he being the central one has always been the central pillar for me.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Just
Well, lucky you having 8 teachers. All of us could only be so blessed to have that. So I do want to move on to the next question that we wanted to ask you, because I feel like right now the world is just chaos in a lot of ways. And, what do you feel like humanity is facing right now? What's your perspective on that?
Well, I think the biggest thing we're facing is climate change and all the repercussions from climate change. And I think this is a major game changer for humanity. I think the loss of homes, starvation, migration, huge financial loss that will strain and bankrupt, government coffers meant to help with rebuilding, where to relocate people to, water resources. I think, as well as, of course, of food. I mentioned starvation, but I think that's the biggest thing facing us. And I think on top of that, we all know that, we've had wars throughout history, and we are facing that now. But I think the thing that's changed with that, as we know, is the possibility of nuclear war. So that is also facing us, that possibility if things got out of control. And I think also we're seeing more and more inequality, the have and the have-nots, which is, I think, increasing a huge amount of suffering for humanity. And we're also seeing a tremendous amount of political polarization all around the world. And this makes it really hard to get things done to benefit human beings and to benefit other beings, and to stay in harmony with our world, our planet. I think in some places we're seeing a real breakdown, like in Haiti recently, of order in any kind of sense. I think there's a tremendous amount facing us. And I think humanity has always had to face some of these things. But I think because of climate change and because of nuclear weapons, it's a different level of threat at this point.
I mean, it can be pretty overwhelming, I think, for the average person to really even grasp what we're dealing with, because there's just so much coming at us all the time. I mean, what I've noticed lately is that the climate discussion has taken kind of a back seat to all of the troubles that we're seeing in Israel and Ukraine and Africa. Like I feel like we're very focused on those humanitarian crises and not as much focused on what's really going on with the climate. And so, I mean, there's so much happening. I guess it kind of leads us to the next question that I know that Elizabeth wants to talk about, because it's like, how do you deal with all this overwhelm that's happening in the world as a person? How do you address that? when it's such a big scale?
Well, I think, first of all, we have to really be willing to face everything that's happening, to really want to know the truth about what's happening. And and then at that point, I think we have to really look to what resources we can gather, both inner and outer resources we can reach out to really help ourselves. And for me, obviously being a spiritual teacher, the practice, meditation and spiritual practice is huge for myself and for ways that I try to help others, due to like really being able to get in touch on an internal level with the wellspring of well-being and wellspring of stability, resilience, creativity, and all of these things that that we need at this point. And I think each of us in our own way, it's important that we find ways that we feel good about helping. That's what is calling us to do to make a difference. Because feeling like at least we're part of the solution, or we're trying to help things go in a positive healing direction is very sustaining for us, gives us a lot of satisfaction, fulfillment, and joy, and that at least we're putting our heart and our actions into the right direction. And I think also reaching out and really being with other people and discussing these things, and being with groups that are working in positive ways, so there's both inner and outer means, I think, that are important.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I'm curious, Lama Palden, when you speak about the inner work, because I think a lot of people are hesitant to do that work, at least a lot of the people that I connect with on a daily basis. The outer work seems more feasible, manageable, understandable. The inner piece, to a lot of people, it's like, ooh, there's just so much. I actually am sort of afraid to go in there and see what it is. That's what I've been encountering. I don't know if you've experienced that, but I'm wondering if you could offer some practical tips for people on like a couple of very simple ways that they can begin to do that inner work if they haven't, in fact, started yet to end or to work with their suffering.
Well, I think, first of all, it's really good to have support to do that. And for that, I think, people, need to search out and find, guides, mentors, teachers in whatever tradition you're drawn to, or in whatever ways you're drawn to, whether secular or spiritual, to help with really doing that inner work. It's really something that is done usually in connection with mentoring. So to really search that out, and there's so many avenues, available, because there's secular forms of meditation and people that teach that, and spiritual forms of meditation and spiritual practice, of course, from the various traditions. And then there's, other kinds of spiritual practices that traditions have. So I think really reaching out first and seeing if you can find, a mentor or guide. If somebody really feels like they need to do some therapy, which can be really helpful, finding a therapist to work through some of the emotional overwhelm and psychological issues that are being triggered by the whole situation that we're facing, that can be a great help. So I think there's a lot of avenues, and we have to look to those avenues. It's hard to just start by yourself from nothing, but to look for some support and guidance.
To mirror back the goodness. We need other people to do that when we're beginning the work, or when we're 10 years down the road with the work. It's just, we're all interconnected and need to have that reciprocity.
I think that's a super important point, really important point, that both from human beings, we need our basic goodness reflected back to us, and also in Tibetan Buddhism, that very much happens from our relationship with the awakened ones, that they're always mirroring back to us our essential goodness and our true nature.
Right, right. And that also, to me, just quickly helps to alleviate the loneliness that a lot of us face, right? If we have that true connection to whatever that source may be, it's
Right.
it's almost impossible to be alone in that.
Right. Right. Yeah. Yeah. The support is really, really important. And also, it's not always easy to feel our own essential goodness
Mm.
or our own pure being. And having that mirrored back to us is a great avenue for actually feeling that in ourselves.
Palden, in your book, you talked about self-love and how in the West, the self-hatred component is sort of prevalent or more common. And so teaching people or mirroring that back helps them see that, like we said, the goodness. But that piece of it, I think, is self-love and self-compassion is a tricky element for people to step into, especially alone.
Yeah, and it's not a fast thing. I think to really learn self-love, I first heard the term from a therapist in my early 20s, and she said, "What about self-love?" And it was at the end of the session, and I just went home and I was like, "What is that?" And it's really coming in an inward process to grapple with what is that? What does that mean? How would that feel? And how can I really treat myself with loving kindness? Treat myself as if I was my best friend, instead of chastising myself or trashing myself or, beating myself up or those things. How can I really extend kindness that I would extend to the people I love? How do I extend that to myself? And I really think that this is incredibly important and valuable.
And I think it's so tricky in our world these days because everywhere you look, you're being compared to people you see on social media and the world of kind of perfection that we have now in this digital environment. I know a lot of young people have a lot of anxiety from being exposed to so much and really comparing themselves all the time. How do you work with young people who struggle with this?
Well, it's really helping people come to a place in themselves where they can rest, through meditation, being able to really connect internally with a source of peace, with what we were talking about, the sense of our basic goodness, and really being able to connect in that way and to realize that we don't need to compare ourselves. First of all, we really need to work on this whole comparing type of mindset and realize that any comparing is not really going to be a benefit to us or to others. And to see those thoughts when they come up and start to let them go and rather learn to connect with ourselves in an authentic way.
Yeah, to simplify that, I speak with clients a lot about living from the inside out versus outside in. And then they get that, right? They understand that's okay.
That
yeah,
makes a good sense.
I love that.
I think that one of the challenges is a lot of people really believe their thoughts as truth, that everything they think that they really attach to those thoughts as, as what is really real. And I think that gets us tripped up. What do you say to people when, they're in that kind of mindset?
Well, I say, is that really true?
Mm-hmm.
I think I try to help people to look at their thoughts and see, is that really true or not?
Mm-hmm.
Or is that just something you heard in childhood or you picked up somewhere that isn't actually true? And I think my experience is most people, when they really look at something, they know whether it's true or not. It's just that we don't usually look from an objective place at our thoughts.
Mm-hmm.
We just take them for granted and believe them, like you're saying. But if we step back and then really look at them, people have a really good sense of whether that's actually true or not.
To your point earlier, it often takes an external witness, thought partner, someone to say that, right? Is to ask that question. That's like, wait a second, you're exactly right. It's not true, but I've been just on that auto script program for so long. We've talked about truth quite a bit, and you mentioned earlier people need to want to know the truth, which I think is so powerful. How do you commit to the truth, even if it's sometimes hard to see and accept?
Well, I have a real commitment to truth in looking at what is true about myself, like in interactions, or if there's any conflict, what is the truth? What's my part in this? And I think, again, if we are able to connect with ourselves authentically and really feel our basic goodness, which is a whole path in and of itself, then we have the resources within. We know that we're not a terrible person. And knowing that, I feel like then we're willing to look at our faults or look at where we weren't skillful or look at something we said that, really wasn't kind or helpful or whatever. And so there's that way that I'm committed to truth on an interpersonal level and just in terms of how I live my life and what I know and understand deeply spiritually. Am I in alignment with that? Am I in integrity with what I know to be my deepest values? So that's the other sense of it for me, or what are my deepest values? And am I in integrity with those in the way I live my life? And then there's the whole aspect we were talking about earlier, which just has to do with really being able and willing to witness things without bias. And just, I call that objective clarity, like having willing to have objective clarity when we're in the objectivity, we let go of the biases and try to let go of projections and just really see what is, what is going on in our world, what is going on around us in our lives with ourselves. So it's a whole multi-layered, I think, truth has many layers to it and many opportunities for us to, look and see what's in integrity for ourselves.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, when we really hold on to a position with ourselves, we lose sight of that truth. And I remember one teacher saying, if you really just look at a situation and step back and walk around it as though it's a 360-degree view of what's really going on, you can really get to more of a truth place with yourself. And I think there's a freedom in that that happens. I don't know, let's say for some of our listeners who don't really know, what is a witness? What is the witness part of myself? Can you kind of talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, so the witness, it really gets developed in meditation practice, but that's a good way to develop it at any rate. But it's really the part of us that is watching everything all the time and seeing what's going on. And the more we're aware of that and of that quality of in our minds that it is witnessing, it allows us to step back and be more neutral about things and identify more with that part of ourselves rather than, whatever we're fixated on, and I think stepping back into the witness allows us to see when we're fixated on a particular viewpoint without looking at the other viewpoints, or we're holding fast to certain ideas that we maybe have never looked at or questioned.
I wish I had known about my witness as a kid. If I had learned, that that's really a perspective and a place that I could operate from. I so wonder why, with all these amazing traditions that point to that, why that hasn't been built into our culture at all. Why? What do you think happens there? Why is it such a secret in some ways, unless you're looking for it?
Well, I think it really comes out of the spiritual traditions, and we've had a history, in recent, last 100 years or 150 years of separating, religion and state, which, or, from the whole United States history, we did that. That was done in our Constitution, which I think is really valuable. But I think that certain principles from the spiritual traditions can be interwoven in the schools without compromising anybody, without compromising each person's point of view, like your idea about learning as a child about the witness, learning to treat each other equally and to treat people with loving kindness, to treat yourself with loving kindness. I think there's some of these spiritual principles that could and are in certain cases being brought into the schools. I know the statistics on when meditation has been brought into the schools for how much better the kids do academically and emotionally, even with 5 minutes of meditation a day, is really pretty amazing. So, yeah. In fact, the Dalai Lama has spoken to this quite in depth about what could be brought into the schools that could be helpful. So I think there's some of these, like you're saying, things that are almost secret in a way that kids can actually grasp quite easily.
I've seen it with my daughter learned to meditate when she was in first grade, and she just loved it. She sought it out. She'd be like, okay, I'm going to my room to meditate now, Mom. Like it was like a fun activity for her. She got grounded through it. So it doesn't have to be like eating your spinach either, right? Where it's forced upon kids.
Yeah, and it can really help with anxiety and that a lot of kids feel nowadays with both the social pressures as well as with the whole world, what's going on.
Then you mentioned the objective clarity. I love that phrase so much. And neutrality also came shortly thereafter. And that feels to me, I know you've done a lot of work, I believe, with mental health, global mental health, I imagine. How do you thread the needle between those concepts?
Yeah, I think it really, when we're looking at ourselves, like say in therapy or in spiritual practice, and we're looking at ourselves, if we're willing to just face what seems to be difficult, but what seems to be true, and facing those things that we're usually not facing, it might mean that we have to face that we're actually a good person. It's not always something negative. Right. It might be that, we weren't very skillful one day, or, again, meditation really helps develop this, because as one meditates, you go through all kinds of ups and downs and different emotions and all kinds of different experiences. And you learn to just sit with that and keep sitting through all the ups and downs emotionally and psychologically and physically and all of these different ways, and sometimes feeling really connected and sometimes not feeling connected. And as you sit through all of these things, you begin to really strongly develop this objective clarity that you're just simply being with what is. And over time, that really helps develop a deep sense of peace and a sense of being able to be with whatever is happening.
That to me feels like the ultimate empowerment.
Mm-hmm.
No matter what comes, it's okay. It's allowed.
Yeah. And that we have some trust in ourselves that have the capacity to be with it, with what is. And then that doesn't mean that we shouldn't reach out to other people when things are tough. I'm really a very strong component of reaching out to other people, and staying connected in that kind of a way.
And do you see that people don't reach out enough? I mean, do you feel like that's part of our society?
I think American society people are not that close in a way that we see in some other cultures. I think we could be more loving and just more intimate with each other, in the sense of really sharing what's deeply going on with us.
And I mean, I see that if I have acceptance for a lot of others and loving kindness for others, but doesn't always translate to myself. So it's not as easy to share that part of yourself if you don't have acceptance and loving kindness for yourself.
I just think that our culture, because we've come from all over the world, from every different nation. So you have all these different kinds of people coming together from so many cultures, and that all did things very differently and related with each other in quite different ways. And I think it's a huge experiment, which overall, has worked really well. The essential humanity that underlies everything has really come through and made this experiment work to the extent that it has. But I think that our culture could become, well, for sure, a lot more loving, both for ourselves and others, and just, closer in our connections, with each other.
Well, I mean, and maybe this is a good experiment because this is the future of the world. We don't have these distinct cultures that don't interact with each other. And we're now in this situation where we know what's going on everywhere all the time. And we are having to think about the impacts that we make have rippling effects everywhere in the world.
I love in your book, you also talked about the illusion, and I love that word so much, and I've heard it other places too, but that resonates for me a lot, the illusion of separation. To your comments that you've just made, thinking that we're individuals is actually the biggest part of a lot of the foundation of our suffering.
Mm-hmm. Not realizing that we're interconnected and all part of the whole. Yeah. I think people can really get in a place of deep suffering through feeling really isolated. And again, this is something that both reaching out to others, staying connected, trying to meet like-minded people, all of these things, as well as having a spiritual practice that really connects us from the inside out. Both of these things are really important.
And I can see, having a teacher or mentor, because they can affirm these things that come up for us and reflect that back when often we don't even know how to talk about it. I think that's part of it. Like, where do you even start?
Right. How do you find the way? Yeah.
Well, one question I have for you that's kind of related to that, maybe might take us down that path, is the topic of joy comes up a lot in my conversations with people lately. They want to spark it. They want to find it. It's like those tiny moments. Like, how do you personally live in joy?
Oh, well, one thing is that, the basic essential is really connecting with pure being and with what is a translation of actually suchness or reality as it is, dharmata in Sanskrit. So, really resting in that, and in that there's a sense of connection with everything that is, and a sense of what we've been talking about, the really essential goodness in everything. And so that's a primary way for me. But I also have a gratitude practice where I really remember, daily all the things that I have to be grateful for, and really appreciate those and cultivate gratitude a lot. And that really brings me a lot of joy, just to acknowledge how good a lot of things are in my life and how much blessing there is. And then nature for me, like really, where I live, there's a lot of birds, there's water and birds, and just, seeing the birds brings great joy. Seeing the water brings great joy. Just being in nature itself brings me great joy, and really appreciating it, and then little things like just seeing how somebody helps another person brings me great joy. When people are really kind to each other and help each other, it just brings me a tremendous amount of joy to see loving kindness happening between people, sharing, also being with friends and just hanging out and visiting and everything, like we were talking about, being connected in that way brings me a tremendous amount of joy. So both from an internal and external place, I nourish myself with joy. Music, is a tremendous sense of joy. And I think that when we consciously reach out in these different ways to feel joy, it really happens. And it's something that I think is very valuable to actually reach towards, because as we reach towards it, it actually comes closer to us and we actually feel it a lot more.
And I guess I'm curious from your perspective, I hear people go, well, how can I be joyful when there's so much suffering in the world? Is that there's like a guilt component, like that it's not okay to be joyful? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I felt that in myself long ago. And what I realized was the great spiritual leaders are all in a place of peace and joy. And it doesn't help the other people's suffering for us to dampen, because I used to do this when I was young. I would dampen my own joy and happiness. And I would feel like, because of other people and what was happening with other people or what was happening in the world. And I realized that that was really hurting my ability to actually be present and to actually be a source of benefit to other beings. And that I could be of much more benefit to myself if I allowed whatever joy and happiness showed up and allowed it and really rested in that, then I was, in a much better place in myself and able to be of much more benefit to others. And it was really powerful for me to realize that all the spiritual teachers throughout the ages have rested in joy and peace, and that it really doesn't help to not do that. It actually is helpful to people when that's happening rather than the opposite.
Yeah, I love that because joy is contagious, right?
I had
Yes.
say to me, I think a couple of years ago, she just said, "Be the lighthouse," and I think that's what you're referring to, right? It's just like allowing that to shine in the fog.
Yeah. We need each of us to be a light unto the world.
No kidding. Well, that kind of brings us to kind of a closing statement. I would love to hear from you. I mean, if you had a global microphone, what would you say to the people out there?
Well, what I would really say is that at this point in human history, we need to learn to cooperate and to really cooperate together to face our challenges and to solve our problems, to an extent we've never had to before. Because we're a global culture now, and because the major issues facing us are global issues, being able and being willing to cooperate beyond our family clans, beyond our friends' clans, beyond our ethnic, racial, national boundaries, to really cooperate globally to solve what's facing us, I think is what's really necessary. So learning to cooperate, we don't even need to really love each other. That's like a second step. We just need, at this point, it's incredibly important that we learn to cooperate now. If we can't, humanity is not going to survive the challenges that are facing us, not survive them very well at any rate. If we do even survive it, there's going to be tremendous suffering if we don't cooperate together. So I really feel that cooperation is the number one goal that we need to have at this point.
I love how simple that is too, right? It's very accessible.
Well, it's so kindergarten, right? Like that's what we learned in kindergarten. That was like, basic rules of engagement. So it's in our grasp. It really
and we
is.
just need to go beyond, our clan and our boundaries and try to learn to cooperate with everyone, And I mean, there has been some international cooperation on climate change. It just hasn't gone far enough, and there has been international cooperation on nuclear treaties and that kind of thing. So we just need to go a lot farther with it than we've gone.
I agree. I love that. All right.
Because our problems are going to affect everyone. You're not going to be able, no one's going to be able to be unaffected by the challenges that are facing us.
Yeah. Yeah. You can't be protected. You can't be protected by our status in any way or our lifestyle or what have you.
No. And, if a tornado hits our area or a flood or, earthquake or whatever, this is not anything, there's no way to escape that. It's going to happen, fires, whatever. So there isn't a way to really protect ourselves and stay separate from everything that's happening.
Well, it is a teaching in itself. It really shows how we're not separate.
And I like how you said that everyone could choose to pay attention to it now, because for so long it felt like that's over there, right? I'm here, I'm safe, that's over there. But over the past 10 years plus, right, we've realized that cooperation must occur.
I love that.
That so much. Thank you for that. I'm going to keep that in my back pocket. It's beautiful.
Well, it was so lovely connecting with you, and so much wisdom to share with the world. So thank you. Thank you.
And I
Oh,
got
you're
your book.
welcome.
Sorry, I got your book, and I sent a copy to my mom because she will love it too. And how can others find it?
Oh, it's on Amazon and any bookseller. Yeah, Love on Every Breath is the title of it. And it's an ancient meditation practice that really opens the heart and opens our loving kindness to ourselves and others in a very profound way. And helps us in that, really helps us connect with our true nature, helps us connect with who we truly are, that's beyond time and space, the essence of who we are, that essential goodness we talked about, and our essential wakefulness. And so yeah, it's a beautiful practice.
I think it's a practice of our time, honestly. It's so applicable to what we're dealing with, all the pain in the world.
And I lay it out in a way where people can go step by step and just do one step. You don't have to do all the steps, but you can pick at any moment one step to do and just even take that into your regular life and do it off the cushion or on the cushion.
I also loved how you offered two different options, doing it for self and then doing it for other, because sometimes the other piece feels hard to access immediately. I know that I've found that, and other people as well. So having that as the beginning step, or however it plays out for people, it's a really nice compliment.
Yeah, some people find really generating loving kindness and compassion for others is easier, and some people find it's easier for the self.
Wonderful. And for those looking for community, you should definitely check out sukkahcity.org online. They have wonderful programs at multiple levels, introductory meditation to the advanced practitioner for anyone who's looking for community.
Yeah, I think we have to spell that SUKHASIDDHI.
Thank you, Lama Palden. So great to connect with you.
Yeah, lovely to be with you.
Thank you so much. All right.
You're very welcome.
Okay, we did it, people. That was wonderful, Lama Palden. So many good nuggets. Thanks so much for being here with us today in the Now. To learn more, visit us on Instagram at the Heart of Now podcast or online at theheartofnow.info.